I said going into the last break that a Wisconsin politician said something quite eloquent recently. I'm going to spend a minute on this here. A couple of weeks ago, Eric Hovde, who has produced either ambivalence or mixed feelings in his campaign for the Republican nomination for the United States Senate, got a fair amount of national heat when a line that he gave at an answer to a question got national attention, in which he said he was tired of the media doing so many sob stories about somebody who didn't get their food stamps. The story produced a headline in the Wisconsin media, and it got him national criticism. And that is what he said. He's tired of the media doing sob story about somebody complaining they didn't get their food stamps. Hovde, for the last couple of weeks, has tried to turn the issue around and even wrote a fundraising letter about it, saying that his comments were taken out of context. He has succeeded in getting the Sentinel Journal today to print the entire response that he gave. And I think he not only makes a pretty compelling case that this was exactly what was done to Mitt Romney by Andrea Mitchell in the comments on the sandwiches at Wawa, as it was done to him here. But beyond whether or not his comments were taken out of context, I thought the answer that Hovde gave off the top of his head was an extraordinarily strong summation of the problems that we face right now with the amount of debt that we are carrying. And I do want to credit the Sentinel Journal for at least printing Hovde's entire statement, because it not only puts a proper context in the comment he made about the sob stories about the food stamps, more importantly, the other statements he make I think are important to hear. And I'm going to read this all to you. Here's Hovde's entire response. Yeah, look, what frustrates me is that we know these things because we have so much historical background to understand them. We know that no matter what you do with tax rates, you generally end up somewhere within the same bar. Unless you push tax rate too hard, then you actually collect less revenue. And I'll just use states as an example of this because we can see it clearly played out. By the way, I'm going to do something I rarely do in the middle of something. This is important stuff. Pay attention to what he's saying. Pay attention to what he's saying about what happens when you move tax rates up and down. Listen to this. I'm actually bawling out the audience, fearing that some people might not be paying attention. And I'm saying, listen to this. This is how strong his explanation is. How many people now do you think will now start paying more attention because I told them to start paying attention? Paul said people perked up. Well, that's why I did it. He continues. I'll just use states as an example of this because we can see it clearly played out. California. I have a community bank in California. The only thing that keeps me awake, because this bank is like bulletproof, it's like Fort Knox. If you ever want to have a safe place to put a deposit, this is it. But the only thing that keeps me awake at night is the state of California. They have consistently increased taxes, and they have consistently received less revenue. Understand what he just said. They've raised their tax rates, but they keep getting less money as a result. New York, same thing. Illinois now has moved in that direction. I've been talking about that. It doesn't work. Capital is mobile. Capital can go anywhere. Again, when I talk about our corporate tax rate, if you want to know why a lot of jobs have left this country, look at our corporate tax rate. This is a major point he's making. Again, listen to this. If you don't want to use states, go to Europe. Look at what's going on with Greece and with Spain. Oh, we're having a revenue shortfall to meet our pension obligations. Oh, let's increase taxes. And they get less economic output. We have a fundamental spending problem. In saying that, I do believe fundamentally getting rid of all of the corporate welfare. We are losing $151 billion a year on corporate welfare, and it distorts the system. But my view is push the rate down, rip out the corporate welfare, and make the system fairer for everybody and create economic growth. We've got to get back to getting economic growth because we cannot get there solely through tax cuts. But I just wish at some point people would pick up a book and just say, let's look at history. In fact, this debt issue is so profound. The best book ever written on debt and debt collapse of governments was done just 4 years ago, or 4 years ago, or 3.5 years ago. It's a great book if you like economics. Now, it may put you to sleep at night at times, but, quote, this time is different, 8 Centuries of Financial Folly, written by Ken Rogoff and Carmen Reinhart, 2 of the greatest economists of our time on the issue of debt. They went back for 8 centuries and modeled you people, are you still listening? Because I may give you a quiz here. They went back for 8 centuries and modeled every government that's ever went into default. They have shown empirically that if a government gets more than 90% of the debt, let me slow down. They have shown empirically that if a government gets more than 90% of debt to their economy, and it stays that way for 3 years, you are left with one of 2 options. Both are utterly disastrous. A default, or a massive debasement of your currency, which causes hyperinflation. Folks, we're at 100%. I mean, it's scary. It scares the heck out of me, and I'm not easily frightened. I'm a 6'3.5" guy who fights Brazilian jiu-jitsu. I've had a lot of tough things in life. I've lived with a bad disease for 21 years. I've had multiple sclerosis now. Fortunately, I've done well. Very few things have ever scared me ever in my life, as my older daughter can tell you. This issue, though, really scares me. We're not just talking our kids and our grandkids. It'll come in the next 4 or 5 years if we don't change course. I mean, we've got to do it like right now. So, I see a reporter here. I just pray that you start writing about these issues. I just pray, stop always writing about, the person who couldn't get their food stamps or this or that. I saw something the other day, it's like another sob story, and I'm like, but what about what's happening to the country and the country as a whole that's going to devastate everybody? Well, in fact, what happened is the reporter wrote only the final sentence of what he said. He did exactly what Hovde asked him not to do. Stop doing the sob story thing. Write about the larger story about what our debt is right now in relationship to our whole economy and how this crisis is going to be very, very close. And in fact, what happened is that story didn't get told. And the reason I interrupted Hovde's answer here several times is I've been struggling to try to figure out a way to get people to think about the fact that under Obama, we've exploded the national debt by a staggering amount just in his 3.5 years as president. And we're at a point right now where we can't service the debt, that it's strangling the entire budget, that until we get economic growth, we'll never produce more revenue. You can't raise taxes to get out from underneath it. Hovde said 4 or 5 years. I've been telling you, I think that's right. I've said the one good thing about Greece is that it's giving us an indication of where we're going. I did in the last hour Stockton, California, thinking of filing for bankruptcy. The state of Illinois is right now a train wreck with no ability at all, I think, to pay down its debts and its revenue continuing to decline. I think Hovde's answer here is one of the best explanations I've seen of how serious the debt problem is and how we need to create economic growth to begin to address it and stop spending so much money. Now, the point that he was making is that these authors went back 8 centuries and said that the point of no return is when your debt is 90% of your economy. In other words, if you take the total amount of the economy and the total amount of the national debt, whenever that total national debt is 90% of what your economic output is, you're in a witching hour. And every country that's ever had to deal with it has either done 2 things. Either they defaulted, which is what might happen in Greece, or they simply devalued their currency. When you devalue your currency, you wipe out the value of all the savings people have. In other words, if we have inflation of 25% a year for 4 or 5 years, the people who have $500,000 saved for their retirement, it's really worth only $150,000. You're wiping out the savings of almost everyone. The people on fixed incomes get killed. Now, that is a way to pay down your debt because you're making the old dollars worth less than they were before, and you're paying for it with these inflated dollars. It does allow you to deal with the debt problem, but it creates massive other problems. The inflation that will occur will drive gasoline to $10 to $12 a gallon. The price of all hard assets and all hard goods and food goes to the roof. And the value of all of your savings plummets. He's saying that this is what's happened every time a country has gotten its debt to 90% of its economy. We're now above that. We're at 100. And the point he was trying to make is that this is serious stuff, far more serious than some crybaby claiming that, they went 3 weeks without food stamps. We're talking about the entire country not being able to afford food. I thought it was an extraordinary answer that he gave. Aside from the fact that they took his comment at the end and made that the story, which may have been naive on Hovde's part, to think that he could say that to a reporter and not understand that the reporter wasn't going to do what he wanted, but instead screw him. I thought his answer was a very, very eloquent and profound understanding of the severity of our problems and the fact that it's the debt right now that is taking us literally to the brink. I've thrown so many numbers at you, and I know that for a lot of people, they just don't stick. They bounce off your head. And the current budget that we don't have a budget, our current spending, the entitlements and debt service equal the amount we're taking in. Everything else, all the discretionary programs, which is all of the social welfare programs, transportation aids, education aid, all that stuff, that's all over and above the money coming in. Right now, we are receiving enough taxes to pay the entitlements and the debt service. But the debt service is artificially low because federal bond rates are still anywhere from 0 to 3.5%. And the new debt that we're adding on every year hasn't come in yet. In other words, all of this year's debt, the $1.4 trillion, gets added to the debt next year. The payments get higher, and when interest rates go up, the amount we're paying for debt service each year goes up, up, up even more. It's a cycle of death, and Hovde says it's terrifying. I think for 90% of Americans, this is not sunk in. They think we're 40 years away from being Greece. Wait till Greece and Spain default. This will put our credit markets at, I think you're looking at the potential here for American financial institutions to fail. If there's a default, it's over. We can't default. Default, I think, will not happen. Instead, we will allow hyperinflation, which will instead just destroy everyone. If this sounds overly gloomy and doomy, consider that we're now 3.5 years into a presidency that is running a national debt of a deficit of 1.3 to 1.4 trillion every year. And you can't even get anybody to pay attention to it. And the demagogue's response is, let's just raise taxes. You can raise taxes on everyone through the roof. You can't get to that type of money. The key number, right now our debt is at about 100% of economic output. Whenever a country does that for 3 years in a row historically, according to Hovde and the authors that he cited, they either default or they devalue their currency, both of which are disasters. And for the life of me, I don't know how you can get the American people to understand that's where we're at, particularly when you've got a president who deludes them with the crapola that if we only raise taxes on the rich, this would all go away. I know that 1.3 and 1.4 trillion dollars are numbers that people can't relate to. But starting with this stimulus, we have a president who has just gone on a binge the likes of which we've never seen. It took us 3 years to get to where Greece has taken 40 years to get. And the only way it ends is for significant economic growth and significant real reductions in the amount of money that we spend. And I'm going to tie this up as I go to the break. Yet, and I keep bringing this up because it's just so profound to me. I can't even get Ron Johnson and guys like this to talk about it. Yet, despite the fact that we have this incredible need to cut spending, we're still planning to let Tom Barrett spend over $75 million to run a trolley around in a circle in Milwaukee. How are we ever going to cut the amount that we need to cut, which is so enormous, if we can't even stop idiocy like Barrett's trolley? And if you have one political movement, the liberals, that doesn't even offer up a serious way to do it. This is frightening. And Hovde is right about this. And I'll tell you something else. His comment here is the best comment I've seen so far by any of the 4 candidates running for the Senate.